Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an IFBB Pro. Today's guest is Ron Gordan. Ron, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. Happy to be here.
For sure, man. So, Ron, I just want to ask you, I kind of like to ask all my guests the same couple questions just to kickstart our conversation. So the first question I have for you is, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Well, I'll try to keep it concise because I have a lot of guys I look up to and admire in that regard. I'm going to start off with the obvious ones, Ronnie Coleman. We share the same name, and obviously he's the man. He owns the record. I don't think his 03 physique will ever be attained. So we'll start with Ronnie. I'll go with the man that preceded Ronnie after that, which would be Dorian Yates. I think Yates is a testament to the hard work and the discipline. I mean, I think he'll tell you he didn't have the greatest God-given genetics compared to some of his contemporaries, but he did have the best, most meticulous, maniacal work ethic. And that's one of the things I admire the most about Dorian. As far as his physique, obviously his back poses are incredible. Behind Dorian, I'm going to go with Flex Wheeler. I think Flex occupies the throne of having the best physique that everybody aspired to have, regardless of if he won or not. When you look at that guy and you say, wow, he's the I want to look like him guy. You know, that's Flex Wheeler. Just everything so round, so proportioned. Great poser. You name it, Flex had it. He never really put it together at the right time to get to the mountaintop. But nonetheless, Flex is up there. Chris Cormier, a personal friend of mine and mentor, he's up there. I think Chris is probably the most balanced bodybuilder of all time. Literally no weaknesses, incredible poser, incredible flow. Like I said, the guy had no weaknesses. And with that said, let's not forget he had a wow factor with it. So he had it all. As far as going old school, I think the most underrated bodybuilder of all time somehow is Lee Haney. Lee Haney somehow won 8 Mr. Olympias and retired at the age of 32. Before that's earlier than when I got my freaking pro status, and Lee Haney was already retired. And, you know, in my firm opinion, if Lee Haney, his genetics, if you took him and you started him in year 2015 with the advancements in training, technology, protocols, gurus, and all this stuff, I still think Lee Haney's genetics should be a top 3 Olympian. No doubt about it.
Love that. Now, I want to ask you, sometimes I'm kind of curious, some of your current peers that are competing with you, against you, are there any physiques or any guys that you really look up to, or you just respect the way they carry themselves, or maybe the way they train, something like that, or you just kind of focus on yourself?
Well, I think I borrow a little bit from everybody. Current guys, old school guys, and that kind of whatnot. From what I see, having not trained with a lot of these guys that I admire, from a training standpoint, I really like the way Nick Walker goes about business. You know, for a guy who is a quintessential mass monster, he goes about things very meticulously within his training, very controlled, eccentric. You don't see him going in and just tossing around weights for the heck of it. I'm sure he'll tell you if he wanted to push the bar on some of the amounts that he lifted and sacrifice for him, he could, but he doesn't. So I really like and respect that about Nick, is that he's really all into using what he needs to develop his physique and not trying to, you know, do it for the gram, so to speak. So I respect that about him. As far as other guys and the training styles and work ethics that I like, there's a guy, I don't know his first name, but he goes by the name of the American Bully. He's very creative in some of the workouts and things that he does, as far as like using angles and making sure that he really gets a real good contraction. I apologize for not knowing the guy's name, but I see his material all the time. It's very impressive. So I like that about him. I like Hunter's consistency. Hunter's obviously really been big about, you know, finding a sequence of exercises that work and, you know, performing them to a level of excellence before he moves on to see if maybe I want to do a different exercise to stimulate that. And so he's really big into progressive overload to a T. I don't want to speak for him, but that's just my observation from what he does. And I respect that. Again, very meticulous form, focuses on the contraction. And like, those are the types of guys that, you know, for the clients that I train, if they were to ask me, hey, coach, you have some tutorials, not from myself, I steer them in those kind of directions because, you know, they're not ego lifting or anything. It's very good for some of the youngsters coming up.
Very cool. Love that. So tell us, Ron, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then why did you start lifting weights at that age?
Okay. I officially started lifting weights when I was about 15, 16 years old. And as a youth, pretty much for the majority of my young adult life, I was a basketball player. And I actually started lifting weights because I suffered a basketball injury. And I was really, really bummed out about it as a kid. And, you know, after I got my arm put back into place, you know, I asked the doctor if there's some things that I can do to help me avoid injuries and whatnot. And again, this was 100% basketball oriented. And he says, well, you know, I was a pretty skinny kid. He says, if you lift weights, you can build your body up, and that's going to have an inherent effect on strengthening your bones, which is going to have an inherent effect so that you can avoid this injury in the future. So in my mind, I just wanted to do that to make sure I can still play basketball. Had nothing to do with bodybuilding, had nothing really to do with aesthetics. So my parents, you know, being the hardworking folks that they are, you know, they put all of their pennies together for me so I can have that one nice Christmas gift. That's all I wanted. And they came through for me. So I got this all-purpose, I want to say Joe Weider machine that I had in my basement. It had a pull down, a butterfly pec deck, and a chest press, and even had a little thing for extensions, man. So that was my start. After that, I would say every 2 or 3 months, I would get like something small, a set of dumbbells, you know, a cheap bench that kind of, you know, the bench that people have on the outside of the house sometimes where the actual rack is inside your hands. Yeah, you know, I had one of those in the house and it kind of collapsed on me a couple times, but I survived. And that was pretty much it. So my routine back then was, again, I was big into basketball. I would literally stay home between like 7 and 10 every night. And I would lift weights during each commercial break for 3 hours. So that was, you know, I had no rhyme or reason to it. I probably trained arms every day, but that's how I got my start.
Love it. Now, when you kind of started lifting weights for the first time, Ron, was it, I mean, did you really enjoy it, or was it still more really focused on, hey, I'm just kind of doing this so I don't get injured or to correct an injury for basketball? I mean, what was kind of your mindset when you first started lifting weights?
Well, when I first started lifting weights, you know, I, like a lot of people at that stage, or even nowadays, you know, I thought I'm going to do some weights, I'm going to get sore, and then tomorrow I'm going to wake up and everything's going to be bigger and I'm going to have to get new clothes. Wrong. The soreness came and that was it. And I'm like, man, you know, this sucks, you know, but I'll tell you what really kept me going was I was very, very in touch with my family and our financial situation. And I realized how much of a sacrifice my parents made for me to get me this little piece of gym equipment at the time. So for me, I continued to go past that point of this isn't working in order to at least say, you know what, I'm not going to waste my parents' efforts on this. And a strange thing happened is that other people noticed what I couldn't notice, which was that I was changing. I was improving. I did have some lumps and bumps going on. And it's a feeder fish, man. You know, once you get those first couple compliments rolling in and people noticing your gains, you know, it's like, oh, really? Oh, yeah. You know, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're darn right. Yeah, I did that. So that's when it kind of became part of like the aesthetic appeal of it. And then when I played basketball, there was some benefit to it as well. Because although I'm taller by average man's means for basketball, I'm only 6'1". So I needed to be more of a pit bull on the court.
Right. Very cool. All right. So I kind of like to use that last question to transition into the guest's backstory. So if you don't mind sharing with us a little bit, Ron, like where did you grow up? You already mentioned your parents. It sounds like they had a really big influence on your younger years, but talk about basketball, talk about any other sports you played. Just talk about that childhood a little bit up to about high school, and then we'll transition from there.
Cool. So I grew up as the only child until I was about 15, and my little brother was born. So I always called myself the uncle brother, you know, because by the time he could talk, I was a grown man. So I grew up in Detroit, and my mother and I were alone for the majority of those years until she met my stepfather, who I will call my father because he was there for the most part. And I never stayed out of school more than 2 years. And I think one of the things that helped me because of that, honestly, is that I grew attached to the things that I can control because I didn't have that friend base that I can count on. So I really latched on to academics. Whereas I think a lot of people who had a stronger friend base, sometimes that took away from the focus because, you know, they leaned on those friends. Peer pressure was a real thing. And for me, I'm like, listen, I'm not going to know you guys more than 1 year anyway. So let me just focus on what I can control. And that really actually helped me as far as producing academically. So that was that. But growing up in Detroit, basketball was my first love. I love playing football, riding my bike. Things were different back then. Obviously, I think technology is a beautiful thing, but it can also become a hindrance with regards to the expectation of availability. You know, kids aren't allowed to say, I'm going to go play and I'll be back in 3 hours. You know, it's where are you? Turn your GPS on. I need you to text me. And, you know, I think that's good for peace of mind for the parent, but I think it actually curbs some of the development of kids and kind of learning some of the ins and outs and learning people and relationships. So I grew up in that, I guess, quintessential old school fashion where, you know, the rules were come home before the street lights come home, you know, and my mother gave me a east, west, north, south, you know, perimeter as to where I could go and couldn't go past. And then from there is use my best judgment. So I was off and away. I was not seen outdoors without my basketball ever, you know. So when I hear these young kids and they have these aspirations for sports and all this kind of good stuff, but they're playing soccer and they're playing hockey, and it's like you have to have an obsession with whatever you're doing that unfortunately doesn't lend itself to playing everything. And I think for me, like I would literally sleep with my ball. I would go outside. If I was going to play basketball, I dribbled to the basketball court. You know, it was just a constant thing. And that's how I kind of felt about it. And that was my first love. So I did that up and through high school. Let me see. Other sports, and like I said, I dabbled in all of them. I really wasn't that good of a baseball player. Okay, sorry about that. I really wasn't that good of a baseball player. I think it was just a little bit too monotonous at times. But football, I was pretty cool at, but I never actually delved into it like full time. I think I would have been pretty good at it looking back on things. And that was pretty much it. Other than that, I was a quintessential nerd.
So, was there like a coach? Was there a teacher? Was there some sort of adult figure kind of in those younger years, Ron, that really had a big influence on you or had a huge impact in your life, or not per se?
One man stands out. There's a guy by the name of Don Meadows. He was the older brother of a really good friend of mine. And when I say older, I mean, like Don had to be at least 20 years older than us. He was coaching kids basketball and things like that. And what he would do is he would lend a lot of his time to some of the inner city youth. You know, he had this huge conversion van and he told us around and basically give us opportunities to kind of play and scrimmage and get good at things that we probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so based on our financial situations or just the flexibility of our parents' schedules. And Don kind of took me under his wing, but it was a huge portion of that was tough love. You know, like I said, as close as we were, you know, as far as coach mentor, it never lended itself to me getting, oh, I'm going to get more minutes in the game. Or if anything, I think he went above and beyond to show other people that he's not, you know, showing favors to me. So I learned a lot from Don. Just a very sober, realistic approach to things. And that's kind of one of the things that I kind of keep with me as I go through with like bodybuilding is I never get too high, never get too low, but I'm always focused.
Yeah. Love that. Now I want to ask you, cause I actually lived in inner city Detroit for almost a year. Back in 2014, I worked at the downtown YMCA as a youth summer counselor. So what area of Detroit did you grow up in, or did you kind of move around a lot in and around Detroit?
I did move around a lot, but I finished up high school in the northwest part of Detroit. So if you want to think 8 Mile and Southfield region, that's kind of where I was, just inside of the city limits. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. I lived in a flat on the cross streets. It was Weatherby and Warren, kind of right on the edge, right next to Dearborn on the west side. It was an experience to say the least. So, but
I'm telling you, man, like I said, I have a lot of friends of mine who have children or they grew up in different places. And people always ask me questions because they hear things about Detroit and they're like, is Compton worse than Detroit? And I'm like, listen, let me tell you something. First of all, Compton's like this big, okay? And second of all, no, it's not. Detroit is just a different place. It gets into you, but it teaches you a lot of life lessons. If you can make it out and give that message to the rest of the world, you're going to be golden if you can make it in Detroit.
Yeah. Now, you know what? I met a lot of beautiful people, and one of my favorite like t-shirts or little slogans I saw around Detroit when I lived there was Detroit hustles harder. So I got to see that a lot, some different stickers and shirts and things like that, but it's definitely a lot of great people out there. And it was a great experience for me. So let's talk about, you wrap up high school. I'm assuming you were probably wanting to be a professional basketball player or something like that. What did life kind of look like for you after you graduated high school? Did you go off to college? What unfolded, if you don't mind talking about that?
So after high school, although I would have loved to had Phil Jackson or somebody on the NBA kind of knock on my door. Again, I was a realist, and one thing I realized is that it's everything about sports is like a funnel, and the higher you go, the more it kind of dwindles down. And it's like, listen, if you aren't the best player on your high school team, unless you have like some growth spurt that hasn't happened yet, chances are you're not going to be the best player in college, which means if you're not the best player in college team, well, you're not going to go pro. Okay, that's just typically how it goes. So needless to say, I got a pretty good handle on what I could do. Although I love the sport, I didn't let my love for my sport kind of dilute the reality of things. So for me, I did play in college. I was a walk-on. It was very, very short-lived. I eventually left that situation to join the military to kind of help me further the financial aspect of school. I did that for 6 years while finishing my degree, and it was great. I have no qualms. I love my short career in the Air Force. The only thing that kind of stunted that was the fact that I left Michigan. I would have had to transfer squadrons. It would have been a lot of commuting starting off in a new career for me. And it was just kind of something that I really didn't want to do at the time. So I kind of let my enlistment end, and I was honorably discharged. But as far as college, again, I was a typical student with aside from that short stint as a basketball player, and finished school with a degree in public law. And when I was in college, that's when I kind of got my start into lifting dead weight. Because prior to that, like I said, I was just doing my thing in my basement.
Very cool. So let's kind of start transitioning into bodybuilding talk then. So you kind of start getting a little bit more serious in college. Why don't you just talk about when you really started to get into bodybuilding and how did you get into it, and just talk about maybe those early years, early competitions for bodybuilding.
So I graduated school when I was like 22, right? So believe it or not, it wasn't, I graduated and I started competing. Honestly, after I graduated, I started my career, and it was well into 4 or 5 years after college before I even thought about doing a bodybuilding show. So I was about 27, 28. I knew some professionals in the natural federations, and they always told me I had really, really great genetics, especially considering I didn't know what to do and I didn't know how to eat or anything. So I entered a natural show when I was 27, and I won. It was at like a high school gymnasium and whatnot. And then promptly thereafter, over the next couple of years, I hit the injury bug. I ruptured both biceps 6 months apart. And while those were getting fixed, I went on ahead and got 3 small hernias repaired. So somewhere between 27 and 30, I was on the shelf dealing with injuries. Then I transitioned to another career. And at that point, I was about 30. And that's when I officially decided to pursue bodybuilding full-time. I stopped playing basketball recreationally because it was counterproductive to being a bodybuilder. It's just too much unpredictable cardio. And when I was 30, I entered my first NPC bodybuilding show. Had my first legitimate coach trainer at the time. And I was fortunate enough to win overall my first show.
So what was the catalyst, Ron, for you after you had those injuries? What was the catalyst for you to kind of say, you know what, I'm going all in with bodybuilding?
You know, I think after I won that natural show, I had the bug, but I didn't have I didn't know what it led to. Nobody gave me, like, you know, you go to high school counselor and they give you the outline of, if you want to be a doctor, you got to go to school, you got to get your undergrad, then you got to go to medical school. Nobody gave me a diagram of how this whole thing works. I didn't know what a national show was. I didn't know what a regional was. I didn't know that, you know, all these other different nuances now that are second nature to me, as far as, oh, if you place top 3, then you qualify for nationals. If you go to nationals at this show, first and second place go pro, all that stuff. I didn't know anything about it, you know? So I just started competing basically for the heck of it at regional shows. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years. I was just that guy that did a local show once or twice a year, and I worked. I never had really big time aspirations of turning pro, mainly because I didn't know what being pro was. I knew, obviously, I became a fan of bodybuilding and bodybuilders, but I never associated myself as being one of those guys at that level, or potentially being one of those guys at that level.
So then when you were at 30, then what was kind of that catalyst to kind of say, all right, I'm going in with this?
It still didn't happen at 30. 30 is when I became the regional show guy. When I was about 34, I forget which show it was, but I lost the show where I clearly felt like, you know, from a structure and genetic standpoint, I'm better than some of the guys I'm losing to. And I know the reason why. And although I didn't hold those things against those guys, I just made a decision to say, you know what, I'm going to push myself in a different direction too, to see what happens. So when I was about 34, 35 years old, that's when I decided to shoot for a pro card.
So in those earlier days of bodybuilding and competing, did you have like a mentor? Did you have a trainer? Did you have anybody kind of showing you the ropes, or was it kind of just reading magazines, finding stuff on social media? How did that look?
Well, it definitely wasn't social media. I never had Facebook, and I didn't get Instagram until just before I turned pro. So I was one of those old school guys. So one of those shows I told you about where kind of things kind of didn't go my way and I decided to turn the corner, there was a guy from my local area whom I had not met yet, who happened to be watching the show. And he remarked to somebody that did know me, hey, bring that guy to me. He's got what it takes. He's going to be pro. And a lot of time passed, and eventually I did get the message, and I went to see him. His name is James Juge. And so I went to Coach James Juge. You know, he had been in the game for a very long time. You know, one of those very good quality journeyman bodybuilders from the 90s and early 2000s who he was always there, but like second and third at some of the big shows, just didn't quite put it together. So he's very experienced. He eventually turned pro in classic physique just as it kind of started. But so I went to James, and we worked together for about 9 weeks, and I got 5th place, first national show, which I thought, man, this sucks because I've never gotten this low before. But they're explaining to me like that's like a huge deal, especially for a newcomer. And then I kind of got into the backgrounds of the other guys who were ahead of me. And these guys on like 3rd, 4th, 5th national show at this point, you know, huge backings and all this stuff. And again, they had social medias and stuff. So I'm like, oh, so I guess it's a good thing. So this was 2017. So 2018, James and I were together the whole time. I trained specifically for USAs. And I got up there, everything was good. I nailed it. My mom was in the stands. I thought I had it, and I got second. And I'm like, oh man, hey, you know, second feels worse than 5th, you know? So I didn't dawdle too long. I didn't rest on my laurels. I got my stuff together, wrapped my mind around what I needed to do. I went to Pittsburgh the same year. I'm so happy I did. And I got my pro card at North Americans, 2018, 6 months after I got second at USA's. And that's when my pro career started.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, I want to ask you, I want to touch on, before we kind of go further in terms of your pro career, I want to ask you a little bit about training. So kind of in the beginning, what was your training like? And then how has it evolved over the years?
In the beginning, I kind of had like a bro split, you know, one body part a day and all those kind of good things. And I was really attached to the 4 sets of 12, occasionally drop sets. You know, I really wasn't in tune and in touch with like the nuances of things, hand placement, thumbs here, squeeze here. So you can kind of say I was just a raw talent that, you know, I didn't just mess around and like move weight, but it really wasn't the most meticulous professional looking thing in the world. And then as time kind of went on, I kind of got into like more of the studying and the training and the nuance and attaching training and nutrition and how they work hand in hand. And I kind of started getting my baby steps wet and that kind of thing. And then I just kind of continually progressed from there to where I am now, where I would consider myself still, you know, and most head trainers will still tell you this, we're always learning. But I would say I'm definitely in the 90th percentile of people with regards to how much I know, where it came from, the history of it. If someone told me to have something that's not working for them, giving them at least a half dozen options for any of these different things. So yeah, I believe that intensity is the key to changing your body. You know, I think that the best plan, the best split, and the best form in the world, you can have all of that, but you will get beat by an animal who's just intense. So the key to me is putting the meticulous form and consistency together while being intense at the same time. To me, that is the key to training. Not a special split, not a special workout, nothing. Just doing the exercises the right way as hard as possible.
So from a different interview that you just recently did, I found out that you've been working with Chris Psycho Lewis at his gym. How long have you been working with Chris, and what maybe has he changed, or what has he brought to you in terms of your training?
I've been working with Chris for 2 years. And what I learned about Chris is that as a trainer and a trainee, you need to be extremely open-minded and understand that bodybuilding is about changing the body. It's not about weightlifting. It's not about powerlifting. You have to think, I want to develop this body part, and I'm willing to do and think about anything that's necessary to do that. So that's the first thing. We have some given tools, but one of the things that I learned from Chris is every tool isn't the best for each car. You got to be open-minded. Now, within that, obviously, Chris is extremely intense. He's an extremely focused and dedicated guy to his craft, and I'm like that too. So it's a great marriage in the gym. It's a very no-nonsense approach. And I think when you work with somebody for long periods of time, because it's approaching 2 years, you have to have that, because you never want to have more camaraderie than work ethic. And I see that with a lot of people, is that their relationship with the person or the trainer supersedes the work. And not to say that Chris and I don't have a great relationship. We do. But we have the uncanny ability to come in and focus no matter what happened the day before or the day after with regards to what we need to do.
Perfect. So what was your pro debut, Ron?
I did the Tampa Pro in 2019. I got 11th place out of 23 guys. It was an okay experience. It kind of went by like a blur. I remember Dexter got first. Luke Sandow was one of his last shows. Unfortunately, he got second. And it was a really good group of guys. Like I said, it's one of those things where obviously I never had a placing that low. I never not gotten first call out and all that stuff. So it was a different experience. But again, for a pro debut, I was kind of right where I needed to be, I guess. And that was my first show. And then from there, that's pretty much it. So I had a couple of other shows.
I'm sorry. Now I heard you talking to Ron over on Muscular Development about you had within the last couple of years, you had a pretty significant injury. Are you cool with kind of talking to us about that, or would you rather not?
Yeah. So first and foremost, let me put this out here. Like, one of the reasons I don't really like to talk about injuries in general is because I feel like bodybuilders, we're all dealing with something. And I never want to be that guy that says, oh, well, this is because of this or anything like that. This is just to be factual about things that I went through. and more or less to prepare other people to say at some point in your career, you may have to too. And don't use it as an excuse. Just be prepared for it. So last March, I basically ruptured my tricep tendon off the bone. And a month later, I had it surgically repaired. It would have been a little bit earlier, but the pandemic, everything became a triage. So tricep tendons were down on the list. So I got it repaired last April. The process after that is you're pretty much immobile, you're bent, then you get a brace, and then you get some other modifications. So it's basically crawl, walk, run, approximately 6 months. And honestly, I just started doing about 10 push-ups consecutively around this past November.
Now, I want to ask you about your mindset because, being an IFBB pro, being a competitive person, being an athlete your entire life,